Welcome to today's Working Recovery, a symposium, How to Build Recovery Capital, Connecting Real Lives to the Concept. I'm going to turn things over to Rebecca Starr with the ATR program. Rebecca, the floor is all yours.
Welcome to everyone who has joined us today from all over the country and all different time zones. We're thrilled to have you here with us today. The webinar we scheduled specifically to coincide with Labor Day and National Recovery Month. And it's a follow-up to the first time we ever presented a national virtual symposium last year. AHP brought you this at the same time last year, and it was called Working Recovery. The organization I work for is called Advocates for Human Potential, or AHP. And I'm Rebecca Starr, a Senior Program Director working here at AHP. It's our intention to drive home with our symposiums and our webinars how important employment and working is for people who are recovering from addictions. As you who were here with us last year learned from our speakers and presenters, employment is associated with better outcomes in addiction recovery. The presenters shared that one's quality of life and feeling of well-being is tied to both health in body and health in emotional outlook. And emotional outlook is boosted when we engage in activities that bring meaning to our lives, such as employment. Our presenters touched on the fact that employment serves as one of the building blocks for developing what we call recovery capital. And the more recovery capital that is built, the better it is. We will delve into this topic in much greater depth today, with the goal being that you will leave today's session with a good understanding of what recovery capital is and how you can help people build it in their own lives. You will learn about the concept of recovery capital, and then you will hear from 4 people, all of whom are in recovery, how they actually changed their lives by building their own recovery capital. And now I'm going to pass the baton over to Britta Loftus, who is the Senior Program Manager here at AHP, and she will expand on this topic.
Thanks, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. So happy to be here. So I'm just going to start this off with a brief overview of what recovery capital is. This is the topic of this webinar. Before I do that, though, I want to first just give a brief primer on recovery, right? So in order to talk about recovery capital, let's have an understanding of recovery first. So here's a working definition of recovery from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the federal agency that oversees substance use and mental health services across the country. They define recovery as being a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. This is a working definition, which means it can change. It can evolve and shift over time, which is also true about somebody's recovery. We also know that recovery is both a growth process, so a process of adaptive change and enhanced functioning, as well as an outcome, where some people describe being in recovery as a final outcome. But we always want to remember that recovery requires constant attention and work throughout someone's lifetime. SAMHSA has also identified 4 main dimensions of recovery. They have health, home, purpose, and community. These 4 dimensions are essential to supporting a life in recovery. Recovery doesn't only mean the absence of substance use or the management of symptoms. It also means learning how to live a healthy, productive, and meaningful life. And having these 4 dimensions in place can help put someone on the road towards a successful recovery. All right, so now that we've defined and kind of overview of recovery, let's talk about recovery capital. So Granfield and Cloud, who are researchers who kind of coined this topic of recovery capital back in the 90s, they define recovery capital as the depth and breadth of internal and external resources that can be used by someone to begin and sustain wellness from addiction. In other words, it's the total resources, both internal and external resources, that someone has to help them begin and sustain their recovery pathway. The research differs on how to measure and categorize recovery capital, but there are generally 4 agreed upon domains of recovery capital that I want to review with you today. So let's start with this first one, which is human capital. This domain of recovery capital includes personal characteristics used to achieve goals. So human capital includes things like self-esteem or building self-awareness, problem-solving capabilities, someone's physical and mental health, or maybe healing from their trauma, having hopes and aspirations, or things like marketable employment skills or budgeting skills, education or life skills. These are internal resources and skills and abilities that help someone achieve their goals. Next, we're going to go to physical capital. This is tangible capital, which includes things like material resources such as money or property or transportation, access to treatment, having insurance, or having your basic essential needs met with things like food, clothing, housing. All of these things are critical, but they're also influenced by someone's environment or their socioeconomic situation. So a young person, a student, or somebody who's supported by their family or their parents, their physical capital can be directly influenced by their family's physical capital and whatever resources their family does or does not have available to them. Tangible capital for physical capital. Now we have social capital. We know that family and friends can strongly impact someone's substance use. So having positive relationships is really important for someone in recovery. With social capital, we're talking about support from and obligations to relationship bonds with people who support recovery. So to help build someone's recovery capital, the focus is on building pro-recovery relationships with both family and friends. Folks may need to develop a whole new network, a whole new social network of people who are not using substances and who are positive influences in their life. This network of family and friends can also provide emotional support and access to a whole nother network of resources. Social capital also includes engagement in pro-social activities, like playing on sober sports teams or going to groups with other people in recovery. Establishing a social network of people who have positive expectations of behavior, who are positive role models, and who fully support someone's recovery. Lastly, we'll talk about cultural capital. This is the cultural and community values, beliefs, attitudes, and norms that support recovery and positive self-concepts. This is a set of positive norms and expectations for behaviors supported by a recovery community, and it includes access to culturally appropriate recovery supports. Some examples of cultural capital include having culturally appropriate support groups available and having other people in recovery and recovery role models available. It also includes community attitudes, policies, and resources that are related to recovery, such as efforts to reduce addiction-related stigma in your community, maybe through billboards or campaigns that you see around, and the availability of a wide variety of treatment and recovery services that are both formal and informal and meeting people's needs. So, recovery capital provides us with a broad overview of the multiple interrelated factors of the recovery process. And the various domains of recovery capital help us identify some relevant factors that help people sustain their life in recovery. You can think of recovery capital as money in the bank. The more you deposit into the bank, the more you have to withdraw in times of need. So anytime someone learns a new skill or makes a new friend or shows up to a group, they get a new job, they save money, or they help other people in need, they're making deposits into their recovery capital bank to strengthen their future and also to counteract any negative factors they come across in their life. Every person, any person really, but any person in recovery is going to face difficulties throughout their life. So the goal is to build up as much recovery capital as possible within each of the domains we reviewed. So there are many different resources someone can pull from or withdraw when needed to help continue to support their recovery journey. And just like recovery being an ongoing process, recovery capital is also dynamic. There are many opportunities for resources to accumulate and to deplete over time. So people can hold different levels of recovery capital at different times. All of these resources help build up to help someone in recovery get through challenging times and be able to maintain their recovery. Recovery capital is for everyone because we cannot build recovery capital without the support of our communities. When we create institutions and organizations that provide equitable resources to support people, everyone, including those in recovery, will benefit. So this September, being National Recovery Month, as Rebecca mentioned, consider how your communities, your workplaces, your faith communities, your neighborhoods, your families, how they can be more equipped to help build recovery capital for those around you. So we're going to now hear from our panelists, which we've all been waiting for, to hear how they have built their own recovery capital. We're going to hear what factors have been important in their own recovery journeys, how some ideas of how we can be involved in the process of building recovery capital for people in recovery within our own communities. I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Erin Elaine, Senior Program Associate here at Advocates for Human Potential, who will facilitate this panel discussion. So Erin, take it away.
Thanks, Britta. So nice to see so many folks chiming in the comments. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. As Britta said, the purpose of today's panel is to hear directly from people with lived experience in recovery and how recovery capital played a critical role in their lives. We prepared questions in advance and we'll also reserve 15 minutes at the end for the audience to ask questions. So as Tony said in the chat, please feel free to use that Q&A function to ask our panelists questions throughout, and we'll select some at the end depending on time. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like for each panelist to give us a brief introduction on their background, and I'll give them time to introduce themselves. We'll go alphabetically, so I'll start off with Paul. Can you come off mute and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Paul. I'm a person in recovery, and I'm the director over at Choice Recovery Coaching. We're based in Western Mass, where we provide training and workforce development, and we coach recovery.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Next, we have Dr. Toby Lynch.
Hi, everybody. I'm Toby Lynch. I'm the Assistant Director for Psychotherapy Innovations and a staff psychologist at West End Clinic, which is part of Mass General Hospital. I'm also the Director of Research and Development at Recovery Works, which is another organization or program that helps people to develop employment recovery capital.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. Next, we have Wendia Rodriguez.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wendia Rodriguez, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. I am currently the program manager at Mass General Hospital for the Recovery Coach program, and also a facilitator for BSAS, and a mom, and a whole host of other things as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendia. Last but not least, we have Miguel Vega.
Good afternoon. My name is Miguel Vega. I'm 49 years old. I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts. A long time in recovery since 2013. A long member of ATR, and blessed to be here with you guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Miguel.
Yes.
So to start us off with a question, we have a question for our whole panel. Whoever would like to jump in may. Based on the overview we just heard from Britta, can you share how you work to build or sustain recovery capital in your own recovery journeys? Whoever wants to start off may. Go ahead, Dr. Lynch, I just saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I can start. I think I was lucky enough to be born with some privilege, and I think part of that had to do with just the financial resources I was able to access in order to go to treatment, and to kind of get introduced to mutual help groups. I also had some luck in my father being in recovery as well. And so I kind of grew up with more positive attitudes about recovery. And I think contrary to a lot of the false narratives that we hear sometimes about, people not recovering and addiction being kind of a death sentence and things like that. I think I grew up really, around people in recovery, and it really kind of helped me to see what was possible, and that people really did better their lives through mutual help groups in particular. I think after I went to treatment, I moved down to Florida, lived in a sober living facility down there, and just got to meet people like myself who were kind of in the same boat, trying to figure out kind of how to of course how to not use but more kind of how to build a life for ourselves or rebuild our lives. And then those friendships helped me to get work, and helped me to enter into new relationships, and eventually that led to being able to get into doctoral school. And through doctoral school, I was able to meet my current wife, have kids, and do something that I consider highly meaningful in the work that I do. And so it's just kind of expanded over time. The more that I've leaned on relationships that I've built in my recovery, the better life gets for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Lynch. So it sounds like for you, personal recovery capital or human capital, the relationships that you've built have snowballed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks. Would anyone else like to tackle that question around how you work to build or sustain recovery capital?
I started out kind of doing like outpatient therapy, and in that I learned how to call someone. Like I didn't even know what like peers were, but I just knew one night that I wanted to pick up. And I was really early in my recovery, like maybe a month or two into my recovery, and I wanted to pick up, and I called somebody from the group, and he came and got me. We got coffee, and I felt better. So that kind of translated into me going back into like a mutual aid group. And there I met other women who were recovering. I really started to feel supported. And that led me to going to a peer recovery center in Roxbury, where I would go to meetings there and groups. And they said they had a job. And I'm like, I've never worked in this field. I don't know what to do. And they said, just try it. You have other skills, they're transferable. And I got the job at the Peer Center. And, while I was there, I took the Recovery Coach Academy and really started to build a lot of recovery capital through my career, through meaningful relationships. At the Recovery Center, I discovered yoga, meditation, all of those things that really helped me to where I am today.
Great. Thank you. I heard some great overlaps between what you've shared and what Dr. Lynch shared surrounding employment and relationships and meeting other people who are in recovery. Paul or Miguel, is there anything you'd like to add? I see Miguel waving too.
My story is a little bit different. I came out of prison in 2013, and I got myself ready in prison. I changed my way of thinking in there, and when I came out, I gave myself an opportunity to go to after incarceration support system, where I was where I got introduced to ATR, and I built my capital through them. I got the support I needed it through them. I came out of prison without nothing, without a license, without without an ID, without any money, and didn't have the things that I needed. But thank God to these programs. They helped me get my license. They guided me to a career that I am today. I've been in the union for almost 10 years. And let me tell you that when I came out of prison, I had no job skills at all. I have been in and out of prison for since I was 18 years old, and spent half of my young life in the Department of Youth Services. So my skills were limited. I was helped get these skills through a program that they had here in Springfield when they was building the casino for minorities. And I took I took these classes for 6 weeks. They didn't guarantee anything. All they said was, we'll give you an opportunity to learn, and I learned the skills. And when I graduated, I said I don't have a license, and that was one of the requirements. So ATR really helped me with that, and after incarceration support systems, they helped me get my license. They were if I didn't have that support, it would have been all that work would have been for nothing. But I got it today. I have enormous support from the people I've met in my job. I've always been to this day. I'm still in contact with as you see, with ATR. At the beginning, I don't have a lot of time now to go to AISS and talk to the guys like I used to when I got out. Today, I started my own business. I own my own house. I have my Tundra truck that I wanted for so long. And my life is good. I'm not gonna tell you that everything's been perfect. I've had a lot of doors closed on me when I got out, just because I didn't have the skills and didn't have a license, didn't have an ID. And everywhere I went to look for a job, I was denied. So getting these having these programs helped me out. I'm here today because of them, and I have a great family. I have great support from my family. They saw that I wanted to change, and they embraced that. Today I have support from my supervisors. I have keys from Bay State Hospital. I have employees that work for me now that know my story and embrace that. I have people that I contracts with doctors and so many people in the community that know my story, that either know my past or and especially the ones that have given me the opportunity for contracts. They know my past and know me from when I was using and stuff like that, and they see me today, and it's an inspiration to them. It's an inspiration to me, to my family, to my friends. When I got out, I didn't go back to the same places I was before. I looked for other avenues that will make me succeed and get me out of that cycle that I found myself in, using back to prison, using back to prison, using back to prison. I got myself out of that by connecting myself with people like you guys. And I thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Miguel. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I saw all the love coming from our audience and the reactions features. So wonderful to hear about your story. And just to add some context, the program Miguel is referring to, ATR, the Access to Recovery Program, is the program Rebecca, Britta, and myself work for. If one of the folks could please post a link to our website in the chat for folks, if you have additional questions about ATR and the services that we provide. Miguel is one of our celebrity participants that you can see in our video on the homepage of that site. So thanks for sharing that, Miguel. Paul, I know you had something you wanted to share before we add to go on to the next question, actually.
Well, I think Miguel pretty much referred to it early in my recovery. I talked about it. I told people I'm not doing that today. I was a traveling musician and I worked in nightlife in New York City. So it was like every single place I went, I was the guy that had that, my drink was already at the bar before I got to it. So I had to always bring somebody with me whenever I had to go to an event or an event that I was performing at, and I would talk about it. And then from there, early on, my recovery started in 2008, and I wasn't aware of peers, so somebody, with the whiskey in their hand told me about a church basement, and I went to the church basement a week later, and I started talking to other folks, and I started building, like as Britta mentioned earlier, the more recovery capital you have. So I came across the next challenge and the next challenge, and I had a lot of emotional challenges early on, not knowing how to deal with my emotions. So somebody said, "Oh, maybe you can use a therapist. Go talk to somebody else about this," right? So, I was able to get health insurance and then get a therapist, and then I found out that I had this other physical challenges when I stopped smoking cigarettes, and I just kept building and building on it. And I've always been like a kind of 0 or 1,000, and I just wanted to be all in, in my recovery, and I just kept slowly moving forth. And sure, there were some steps backwards, and even after multiple years now, there's always something else that is needed. And I know I don't want to get into any further, some of the further topics, but just continue building on it as you go. So, in a big part of my recovery, 3 years into recovery, I no longer wanted to, I wanted to move away from nightlife and all of that, even though I had gotten a lot better and I was in recovery, and I just needed something else and I wasn't sure what it was. So in New York City, I went to a similar program to what ATR offers. And then that's when I was able to go into like a career research type of program, like, what do I want to do? And I spent 6 weeks, just in classes, it's very similar to the ATR program. And I did an internship, which had nothing to do with, what I had said I wanted to do, but that's how I ended up in school for counseling. And that's how I found out about Recovery Coach Academy. And that was 2011. So, 3 years into recovery. So, it continues building, really.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Paul. And so to build on that, when you think about your own recovery capital and the folks you've worked with in your years as a recovery coach, are there any sources of recovery capital that you think might surprise other people?
So often folks think that we need all these external things. And sometimes in early recovery, that is the case, right? I didn't have a home for a while. I didn't think I was without a home because I had people's couches, and I was on multiple couches for a while. And sure, sometimes we do need those external pieces. Miguel mentioned the driver's license. I mentioned health insurance, which I didn't have for many years. But really what's missing is that internal piece. And that's what surprises folks, because when we're out there in active addiction, I always thought like, hey, I need this in order to get that. And I need this person so I can get to that person. If I don't, get there, I'm not going to be able to this. And it was always external, all this external stuff. So I find that, folks go into treatment and hey, you need this and you need that, and you need to get the other thing, and you need this service and you need that service, but how often do we support people in stopping and taking a look at, like, hey, what do you already come with? What are the skills? So, for me, it was just building on those internal skills. Like I was kind of desperate, and maybe that was having desperation, right? Maybe that was a skill, that I then used and flipped so that, I can seek out, this other way, this new way. So a lot of the internal capital is what's often overlooked, especially when folks go into programs and a lot of programs think, oh, we have this person-centered, view, and we have all these services to put around the individual, but no, it's person-driven. So it's like, what do you come with?
Yeah.
What do you show up with? And that's probably the biggest thing, even today, as we go and speak about recovery.
Yeah, I love that, Paul. So it sounds like for you, what may be surprising is that those individual skills that you're coming with, the strengths that you're able to build upon. Sounds like Miguel agrees. Miguel, our next question is actually for you. So Miguel, members of our audience may have seen or remember seeing you, or if they haven't already, I hope they go and watch the video to see you talk about your experience as an Access to Recovery or ATR participant. In the video, hopefully this isn't a spoiler for anyone, we see you donning a hard hat and discussing your work in a trade union as a paver. How did you get on your journey to employment in that field? If you could talk a little bit about that, and how, if at all, does employment help you stay in recovery? I know you touched on that just a little bit about how your supervisor is so supportive. Can you say a little bit more about employment?
Yes. So when I like I said, when I got out, I went to look for work at places that I used to work before. That some jobs that I held for a few months here and there, and see if I got the opportunity. But I was in a lot of doors was just closing. I went to AISS and ATR. They had a flyer over there for, like I said, when they was gonna build the casino and about minorities getting into the union. And I said, let me give this a shot. And I'm gonna tell you, I remember it was on a Tuesday, and they was giving their first meeting, so people can go, and what they would do is tell you about the union, the benefits that they had, and you watch a video, and then you would just sign up for it. And it was on a Tuesday, and I had no transportation. I did have a transportation bus pass thanks to ATR. And I took the bus, but I still had to walk like a mile because the bus wouldn't go that far and down Main Street. And when I got there 5 minutes late. And one of their models in the union is, if you're not early, you're late. So I learned that pretty fast. But the person there was, I would never forget her name. Her name is Pam Howland, and she says, we have another one on Thursday. So I went to the one on Thursday. I was there a half hour early, and after I was done with the video and stuff, I told her about my story. I just got out, and I can't get a job. And she says, well, sign up. And she remembered me, and they gave me the opportunity to take those classes. There was only 25 people in Springfield given the opportunity to take these classes, and I was one of them. And I showed them, man, that I wanted it. I was, anything that they asked me to do, I did. I would always call them and follow up. And when I did these classes, like I said, I wasn't guaranteed anything. I wasn't guaranteed a job. I wasn't guaranteed getting in the union. But I did these classes. I showed up every single class. They were from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. No pay, no nothing. I graduated from those classes, let me tell you. And it was one of the best feelings. I didn't get paid, but I still got the certificate. After that, I had to go apply for the union. And what they do is they prepare you for all the different kinds of jobs that you can get. I could have been an electrician. I could have been a carpenter. But I chose the laborers union because it was the easiest one to get in, and they needed people quick, and they're the first ones at the job sites and the last ones to leave. So I said, I need hours, I need to work, and I interviewed for that for the union. Then I interviewed for it. 3 weeks later, I got the letter saying, yes, you made it to the, we're gonna take you. Then after taking a 6-week class, I found out I had to take another 3-week class uh, for general construction learning, which is up in Hopkinton, Mass. And I went up there for 3 weeks, uh, did the classes, no pay, no nothing. I stood up there from Monday to Friday. My wife would pick me up on the weekend, and I would come back home. And when I graduated that, I waited about 2 months to get a job at the union. I remember I picked up a job. I picked up a job in Ludlow, and I was working there, and the union called me and said, hey, we got a job for you in a day or two. But it's only for a week, they said. And I said to myself, no, it's not for a week. I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna stay there. And I went there, I stood there. It was my first job was landscaping in the highways and stuff for CSL, company called CSL. I was there for a year and a half. I wanted to do more. They wasn't offering me a lot of overtime and jobs, so I knew that I can move up. So I went to a bigger company, and I did. I got into paving. So after paving, let me not get. Yeah, I did. I went into paving. I did paving for 8 years. After 8 years, I've decided I don't want to do paving no more because it's too hot out there. and I got into doing working inside buildings now, where we do demolition and stuff like that. And I've been there doing this for 2 years. Let me tell you that to get into demo and a lot of easier jobs in the union that I'm doing, it takes a long time. You have to put your time in. So I think I put my time in. My union manager knows that. He's gotten a lot of good calls from me, from my supervisors. And today I work at Bay State Hospital. We're building a building there for 2,500 beds in the emergency room, and I've been there for over a year now. And I've met a lot of good people in the union. I stay in contact with bosses that I used to work for. Yeah, and it's great, man. It's been a
Awesome.
good journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Miguel. I think it'll be really impactful for folks to hear how you navigated that process and remained persistent. I want to echo something that Paul put in the chat. He said you were paid in recovery capital that you developed in that process: determination, patience, hope, understanding, learning, and a whole bunch of new skills. So thanks for sharing that as well, Paul. It's remarkable to hear your story, Miguel, as well as all of our other panelists. Our next question is going to be for Wendia. So Wendia, based on your experience, a little bit about in your bio, looking at recovery capital from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, what can our audience do to make recovery resources more accessible to historically marginalized people?
I feel like this could be its own webinar. I would say, because communities of color, Black and Brown communities have been historically marginalized and penalized more harshly in the justice system, we really need to take a look at that piece. So when people, are coming out of prison and they're returning home, they're oftentimes, they have this Corey issue, they have probation fees, they have all of these barriers on top of being discriminated against. A lot of times we want to feel like we're in a post-racial society, but I think in the past 2 years, we see that we still have a lot of work to do. And so, when it comes to building recovery capital, honestly, I really think that people of color need their own spaces. Sometimes we need our own groups and ways to be with each other and be in community. Organizations need to really look at what equity means. And, a lot of places will say we have a diverse workforce, but all of the people who are in leadership are white versus the people who are Black and brown are, lower down on the, organizational chart. So it's like you have diversity, you have equity, but none of the leadership doesn't look like that, does not reflect that. So, I think companies really and organizations really need to look at what their practices are. I know there are companies now, organizations now that even take out where people live because people can be discriminated against even for where they live. So I live in Boston. I live in a neighborhood called Mattapan. And historically, people have said, oh, Mattapan, and they call it all these different kinds of names. And so, employers or people who are looking through resumes may even see that. I've had people assume that I speak Spanish because of my last name. So there's all of these biases that people face when they are looking for employment. I think it really starts with organizations. What are you doing to help with this? And I hesitate sometimes to say diversity, equity, and inclusion because I think it's like a big buzzword, but really, what are we doing for racial equity? How are we being equitable in the hiring process? How are we being equitable when it comes to things that happen at these jobs? At MGH, we have a way to report bias for patients and for ourselves. We are really looking at racial justice from a lens of the people who are marginalized and not having people who are not marginalized making decisions. We're having groups. We have in my department, we're starting an affinity group for Black and brown people because sometimes we need a space where we can talk amongst ourselves. We can process things. A lot of times we face microaggressions. And people, I always tell people, it's not that people are inherently racist, but we live in this society that started out with racism and, colonization. So when you're in that kind of when you've been in this and you've been submerged in this, it's really hard to decolonize your mind. It's really, really hard. And it starts with organizations and then it starts with ourselves. When organizations can start to look at themselves and really be honest and really assess where they are with their diversity and where they are with their racial justice, because then we can start, because racial justice means that some people may not, we've done affirmative action, but it's shown that affirmative action still hasn't trickled down to the people it really needs to. So, we really have to start doing some radical work around racial justice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Wendia. So it sounds like for you, your response is on multiple levels, working at the individual level for the South and for removing barriers for those communities of color, as well as working on an organizational level. I think that's a great way to think about your answer as well. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So thank you. Our next question is for Dr. Lynch. So Dr. Lynch, for those that do not work in the substance use disorder field, where can they access more information about Recovery Capital, and what things can anyone do within their community, within their own sphere of influence to support people in recovery?
Yeah, so the first part, I'd say MGH has a great resource called the Recovery Research Institute that breaks down a lot of the research that's been done on Recovery Capital. I'd say SAMHSA is a good resource. Faces and Voices in Recovery is a good resource. If you want to kind of go back into the crates, the original Granfield and Cloud book, Coming Clean, which is based on the data set he used to come up with that term Recovery Capital, is a nice read. Really surprised me kind of how important Recovery Capital is. And kind of I've really changed my view of addiction the more I read of their work. As far as kind of what people can do within their sphere of influence, I think, and I say this as a therapist, that sometimes works with family members. I'd say forget what you think you know. And there's a lot of ways to recover. And it may not be the way that you think a person should recover, or the way that your friend that you used to know recovered. And I think, reinforcement works better than punishment, and so giving positive reinforcement, positive feedback to people who are really working on their recovery and working on improving their situation works a hell of a lot better than beating up on somebody or using language that's really not helpful. And I think language is a whole other story, but I think is so important of just non-stigmatizing language and adopting kind of non-stigmatizing language as you talk about it, and being if you are in recovery, I like being open about it, and if you're not, at least kind of declaring a willingness to work with people in recovery and an interest in hiring people in recovery, even if it's just like sharing a news clipping or something, or just openly declaring like this is a recovery friendly workplace. This is something that we care about, that's in line with our values. I think for family members, I think it might be, you certainly don't want to shield people from consequences having to do with their use. But again, that positive reinforcement, acknowledging that you might not like the way they're living their life at the time, but that you're there for them.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Lynch. So what you just shared, I think connects really well to what Wendy has shared and what Paul has shared in terms of, working on the self, right? Focusing on yourself and also being person driven, as Paul said earlier. I think that was the term that you used, Paul.
And just to echo what Wendy has said about, people with, backgrounds, Corey backgrounds and things like that. I mean, I think supporting organizations like Ban the Box, which is a great organization to lift some of the requirements for reporting criminal offenses, I think is great. Advocacy groups like ATR, groups like Recovery Works, who I work with, either supporting them with time or money or, just signing petitions, but being a part of a growing movement.
Great. Thank you so much. So our next question is for all of our panelists. I know we've already touched on this in some regard, but if you could come up with just one way that our audience members can help their communities so that people in recovery feel supported to build recovery capital, what might that one suggestion be? Just to rephrase, if you had one recommendation to help our audience members, help the people that they're working with build community, build recovery capital, what might that be? Paul, I saw your hand go up first.
Yeah, just to build on what Dr. Lynch shared, really just focus on what people can do. When we're like all closed up, like, hey, worried about what not to do, and you have 53 other people telling you what you should or shouldn't and all that, support people with what they can do. Just ask them, what's one thing you can do? It's like literally, it's that simple, because there's no one way to recover. Actually, the idea of multiple pathways really are infinite, because there's no one way. And who am I to say that one way is any better or worse than the other? But we have to give people the opportunity to take the step in the direction they feel is best for them.
I love that. So really focusing on what skills the individual has to bring to the table. Okay. How about for others? What do you recommend for folks working with people like yourselves in recovery?
I think a big piece of working with people who are in recovery or even early recovery, or they still might be struggling with their addiction, is to treat people with dignity. At the end of the day, when I introduced myself, I said, I'm a mother. That is a big part of my identity. I'm a daughter. I'm, a friend. So when people come in, they feel broken already from what they did, and a lot of shame and guilt. And so treating people with dignity is huge, no matter what stage of recovery they're in. As recovery coaches, one of the things that I loved about coaching is that I have an opportunity to help people remember what their dreams are, remember what their goals are, and keep that in focus versus like, you need to stop, you should be doing this. They're hearing that already. They're already hearing 10,000 people telling them to stop. They're telling themselves they need to stop. So as a coach and in recovery coaching, you have an opportunity to really help people say, what were your dreams before you picked up any sort of substance? What did you dream about doing? You know, and seeing if you can help them get back there, helping them remember what their hobbies were, those kind of things. So, I think there's such a stigma still with addiction. And then people think like people are just unable to think clearly, or even in active addiction, you can still think clearly. You still have moments of clarity. You're still an intelligent person, a loved person, and treating people with dignity and respect is number one.
I
So
love
well
that.
said.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Windia.
Yeah, so well said, Wendy and Paul. And I think just along with that is, I like the saying, focus on potential rather than pathology. I think particularly in my line of work in psychology, we focus so much on diagnosis and what's wrong with somebody, but really focusing on strengths and the human capital. Like, what do these people have? When I work with people with addiction, their ability to persevere despite hardships and deal with continuing to show up despite so many people who are mad at them and so many things standing in their way. I mean, the ability to persist in spite of that, I think, is just such a powerful asset that people in recovery have. And so I think focusing on strengths.
I think that knowing what the individuals really need, not all of us not all of us addicts go in with the same issues or problems. I think that getting to know the individual and see focus on what that person's needs and weaknesses and strengths are, and taking it from there. I think what worked for me might not work for the next person. So getting to know the person and their background and focusing on that, I think will help a lot. And I also wanted to say that somebody mentioned probation fees earlier. And thanks to Rebecca. I want to say that when I was doing all those programs and wasn't getting paid and couldn't afford my parole fees, the ATR did pay for my parole fees. And thank you once again.
So what I'm hearing, thank you so much, Miguel. So what I'm hearing is getting to know the person, treating them with dignity and respect, focusing on strengths. I think those are all great qualities. I saw that we have about 3 minutes till Q&A. I'm seeing lots of great questions coming up through the chat. So I'll ask one final quick question. If there's one thing for our panelists hope that people in our audience today do as a result of our conversation, what would that one thing be? What do you want folks to do as a result of our chat today?
I strongly recommend that people support these organizations that are helping us, that have helped people like me be where I am. There's no way that I would be here today if it wasn't for these organizations, and I really appreciate. And so, just support these organizations because it's what we all need.
Thank you, Miguel. I saw Wendia come off mute and then Dr. Lynch.
I agree with Miguel. First of all, support these organizations. It would be great if our government could support these organizations, and also I always, when I first got into recovery, I was really impressed when I learned that this woman that I was listening, speak at a convention, she was talking about that she was a lawyer. Like, she had told her story and then she said she was a lawyer. And I'm like, we can become lawyers? Like, that blew my mind. I just didn't think that. And it's not so much the material things that you can get, but it's the hard work that it takes. And I mean, look at Dr. Lynch, he's a PhD, and I'm sitting on a panel with a PhD, and it's like amazing to me to remember, like, this is what recovery looks like. Like, we can have fulfilling lives after surviving, addiction.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank
Awesome.
you, India. Do we have one more minute to hear from Dr. Lynch?
Yeah, we're not going to cut anybody out.
Okay. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, I just to echo what Miguel and Wendy said, I think, being, open, being loud and proud about being in recovery and being out of the shadows. I mean, I think that's really what prompted me to come forward as being in recovery, is just hearing so many people talk about where are all these people who are, high achieving, and, we're always told that they're out there, and they are out there. But I think there's so much fear of stigma, and kind of what are people going to say? So I think, being out about it, being open about it, and, potentially being that role model for somebody else.
Yeah, that one piece of just listen, just be curious. You might look like me, you might talk like me. We might have grown up in the same building, in the same village, but you still don't know anything about me, and I don't know anything about you. So how can we just be curious, and ask, hey, what happened? What would be helpful? Just really simple communication, human, with human skill. Just being curious about it, because stigma and so all of this negative assumptions and us thinking that we know about somebody else when we really don't.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate that. And thank you to all of our panelists for such a wonderful discussion. This is really great. Thank you all for being willing to recover out loud in our Zoom chat today. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Tony, as well as Britta and Rebecca, to begin addressing some questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So actually, Erin, I have a couple questions for you. I'm going to save the first one in my list to the end in case we don't have time to get to what is ATR, because we really could spend a whole day on that, but it is on our website, which we did drop in the chat. But Erin, someone asked, Recovery Capital seems like a program, and a lot of people actually were asking this, is it a program, and where can I access the resource? And is this something I can put together myself?
That's a great question. So I know Dr. Lynch recommended a couple of resources to learn more about Recovery Capital that we'll make sure we share along with the resources for this PowerPoint and in the transcript. But Recovery Capital is really just this concept that underscores a lot of programming in the recovery field, which I'm sure many of our panelists can speak to. The definition being on that slide. So it's the breadth of internal and external resources, where Paul very clearly stated how the internal resources often get forgotten, what folks are bringing to the table already in their early recovery and recovery journeys. So it's more of a concept or guiding philosophy, I would say. Do any of the panelists want to add to that?
Anywhere that you can speak with somebody, you have a few resources that were shared today here, online resources, any kind of recovery center in the state of Massachusetts. We're very fortunate that there are almost 30 of them, where you can reach out, and there's also a helpline that you can just call, and I believe, I don't want to give the wrong number out, but we'll put it in the chat, where you can just get support. And really it's about focusing again on your strengths, what you already have, and what else do I need? What else can I build on? What other skills, things. And, we've mentioned a few already, like, hey, maybe you need a license, or you need your parking tickets paid, or something. What are the skills that you have, and the supports that can support you in going and attaining whatever that goal might be.
The question was, can you, Recovery Capital, I think it is something that you build yourself over the months, days, or what have you. I have changed the way I look at recovery. Recovery doesn't have to be consecutive. It can be cumulative. So sometimes you might get 6 months under your belt, and then you might have a setback. Then you might get a year under your belt, and you might have a setback. But that's all recovery capital, and it's still there. The knowledge that you gained in those times are still there. So I look at it too as like your mind, body, and spirit. When you're looking at recovery capital, how is your mind? How is your body? How is your spirit? If you can feed those things with positive I call it like investments. If you can feed yourself with those things, that's recovery capital. So anything that you do that's kind of counter active addiction is recovery capital.
Well, while I have you, I have a question for you. What do you think multiple pathways to recovery means, and how does harm reduction fit into that? Are people in recovery the future workforce for both harm reduction programs and substance use recovery support services?
Yeah, I think harm reduction is something that people really need to wrap their head around. Like, what does that actually mean? And how does that work, especially in the workforce? Because, a lot of times people will say, well, harm reduction is still helping people to use, or it's still enabling people. But harm reduction could be, I'm not going to use between 9 and 5, but I might use some other times. Harm reduction is, as we know, clean needles and, clean works, just different things. But really, again, embracing people who are still using drugs and making sure that they know that they still have a place in this world, I think is really, really part of the harm reduction, thing that we need to embrace, because it's like people who are still using drugs still need to be treated with dignity, respect, and they can still work. Quiet as it's kept, there are a lot of people who are still using substances and are working. Maybe they don't have a full-blown addiction yet, or a diagnosis of an addiction, but they're using substances and they're going to work. Some of us can't, and that's okay, but we need to kind of wrap our head around, this thing about harm reduction. And I saw that somebody put that harm reduction, a lot of times people will say it's like a step to abstinence. Again, if substance use is on a spectrum, we need to look at recovery on a spectrum. Some people are not going to be completely abstinent. Some people are going to maybe still use. I worked with so many people who said, I've stopped using, some narcotics or this or that, but they still said, I'm not going to give up marijuana. That is something that keeps my anxiety down or my depression down. And I say, that's great. How's that working for you? That's our motto in recovery coaching. How is that working for you? So, I think harm reduction in the workforce really they need to get together. And, in Massachusetts, I know there are some places who don't even test for marijuana anymore because it's legal here, and that's something we may need to take a look at in the future. How are organizations taking this on? Because for so long, there's a stigma behind people who use drugs. There's a really good book by Dr. Carl Hart, I think, and it's called Drug Use for Grownups. And he really speaks to this whole thing right now. So check that book out if you want to read more about that.
This is for Dr. Lynch. From your lived experience, can you speak to the gender gap in recovery services, emergency shelters, permanent supportive housing, and the ability to access recovery-oriented support system more than an AFAB person in recovery?
I think that there are fewer resources available, certainly that are trauma informed. And I think that means less resources for people who, for females certainly, and for people of color as well. I think as far as kind of opportunities, I think when Dia spoke to the lack of culturally diverse kind of mutual help groups, or being able to kind of find your niche within a group therapy program. So I think, there's a lot that needs to be done to improve the diversity of what we can offer in the recovery community. I mean, I think to Wendy's point earlier, I think just the regarding harm reduction, I think so much of what happens to people, I think especially people from diverse backgrounds is that substance use becomes marginalized, and it gets relegated to kind of the shadows, and when that happens, that worsens the addiction, and work, any kind of social capital that we can give people gives them some incentive, something to lose. And I think when you have something to lose, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, the odds of you continuing to kind of progress to either full-blown addiction, or for your addiction to rapidly escalate, I think it diminishes. And so whether it's harm reduction or abstinence, I think getting people back to work, getting people engaged with groups, I think is really key, and doing it in a way that can serve all people.
My next question is for Paul. I actually have two questions for you, Paul. So the first one is, how can I start connecting with people in recovery? And the second one is, some people believe there's a negative view of peer services. So how do we change this bias negative and create awareness of the benefits among those who don't know they exist? So that's a two-parter for you.
I think education and what we call recovery orientation is a big part of it. And unfortunately, the truth is that most organizations that provide recovery support services are not always recovery oriented. Because as we hear, folks speak about abstinence and programs wanting you to stop, et cetera, that is one pathway of recovery, and maybe that's not the person's goal at all, as we have been speaking of. And actually, SAMHSA, they just had a summit on reviewing, where they reviewed and came up with a new definition of recovery, which isn't out yet. And same thing with recovery oriented systems of care, where abstinence is no longer part of the equation now, with because the truth is, most of us have used drugs today. If you had a cup of coffee, you had a cookie, right? And all of us have practiced harm reduction to one extent or another. If you brushed your teeth this morning, you practiced harm reduction, right? If you wore a seatbelt today, you practiced harm reduction. So that's a big part of it. So in reaching out to get support, regardless of where you are in the country, there's a wonderful, or in the world, there's this wonderful thing called Google, and you could just hit recovery, put recovery in any search box, right? And probably first couple of things that come up will provide you with some information. And then if you add the name of your city or town or village next to it, something will come up. And pick up the phone, or send an email, or send an IM, whatever it is, again, in Massachusetts, they have done a wonderful job, ESAS, the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services, in promoting recovery and really championing it, and speaking out loud, right? One of those have been, by our silence, we let others define us. So we got to talk about it, because, the days of somebody else defining me are over, right?
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Erin, the next question is for you. How do you refer returning citizens to construction jobs? I did see that in the chat.
Thanks, Tony. So Miguel got connected to the construction field through our Access to Recovery program. So he can talk more about that, or you can visit our website. Folks can also go to the Building Pathways website, who are located in the Boston area, or in Massachusetts in general, for national programs. I would recommend speaking to your career center. In Massachusetts, we call them Mass Hires. Our local career centers or American Job Centers. They tend to have access to a lot of great opportunities. So definitely reach out to them.
And then I have another question for Windia. Can you share with us how to continue to stay on the course with a smile? And what would you say to encourage someone else to continue the journey?
With a smile. I don't smile every day, but I really think I'm coming up on 11 years in recovery next month. And I really think that what's helped me is building the recovery capital. And what does that look like? And building a network. Like, I can't speak more about my network. I have wonderful women in my life who support me. I have women who I look up to. I have tons of people in my phone that I can call, if I feel like I am in trouble, not even just like, I feel like I want to pick up. I don't get those feelings, but what I feel like is I don't want to move today. I feel unmotivated. And I have consecutive days like that. And I have people in my network I can call and really help me through those tough times. I have different ways to smile. I have 3 teenagers and they crack me up every single day. So when I need like a pick me up, I go to them. I just, I can't say enough about how much my life has changed. And I try to write a gratitude list every day. So that's something else that I do. I practice yoga. I'm kind of like what Paul said about being curious. I'm curious about life. So if there's something that I'm like, oh, I'll try it, I just go out and try it. If it's something that sounds fun and safe, then I'm going to try it, because that for me was a big thing about in recovery. Like, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do for fun? I was young when I came, kind of younger when I came into recovery. And so I'm like, what am I going to do with myself? And finding like fun things to do is important. And finding a network of people is super, super important.
Well, I don't know if you see Anne Marie's comment, but she said you have delivered hope, dignity, clarity, and positive vibes, and you smiled right through it. So
Thank you. Thank you, Anne Marie. I know Anne Marie. Thank you, Anne.
I see she's very supportive of you today. I think I got to all of our questions. I do, before anyone has to leave, Tracy's going to drop an evaluation link in the chat. We do really want your feedback. What did you think today? What did you learn today? If you have any additional questions, you can definitely reach out. The ATR website has all the contact information. And before we turn things over to Rebecca to close us out, I just wanted to see if we had any other questions or any final thoughts from our panelists today.
Thank you all. Wendy, I just wanted to tell you that, yes, I see the smile without you smiling. And also, try vacation. It's awesome. This is something that I do every year with my family, and we have an awesome time. We all look forward to it. God bless, and it was an amazing hour and a half, man. Thank you.
And James is saying it is obvious that ATR is a bridge to real productive way of living. And thank you for saying that, because I know that the team really, that hits them right in the heart. So that's the whole purpose. So anyone else have last, Dr. Lynch, did you want to say something?
No, just thanks to all the speakers and the attendees. Thanks for coming.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to have Rebecca come on here. I'm going to go ahead and add you up here with our panelists. There you go.
I found this inspirational and educational and very exciting. And I hope that everybody here is leaving this webinar with a little bit better understanding about how people in recovery help themselves to maintain the recovery by building what we call recovery capital, and all the ways everybody said, yoga and gratitude journals and taking vacations and going to support programs and being with people who are supportive of you and positive of you, and working and going to recovery support services, and all of that is what builds somebody's recovery capital. And it was I didn't expect it to be as inspirational as it was today. So thank you for that. I want to tell you that we're hoping this will be an annual event. We're right around Labor Day, and September, which is Recovery Month, will bring to you a webinar of substance, and we hope that you will, on your evaluations, tell us if there's any topics in particular, what you might want to listen about. I do know that there's a lot of talk about ATR, and we weren't attempting to focus on ATR in this webinar. We were attempting to focus on the concept of recovery capital, but ATR does build people's recovery capital, and that's why it came up. So ATR is a program. It's a grant-funded program. It's right now only in the state of Massachusetts, and it offers a bunch of different recovery support services to help people with their recovery. But there are plenty of programs across the country that are doing similar work. And just as Paul said, just Google recovery support and put in your city or your state. So thank you again from my organization, Advocates for Human Potential, AHP. I want to thank you for coming and for participating and for asking such great questions. And we hope to see you next year.